You stand on a wooden levee as twilight falls over the Mississippi and the air wraps around you like warm, damp cloth. The year is 1720, though you don't think in those terms yet. You think in terms of survival. How many more hours of light remain, whether the levee will hold through another night, if the fever will come again with the darkness. Fireflies begin their dance above the marsh grass. Somewhere downstream, you hear French voices calling to each other, and from the forest edge, the low rhythm of native drums. The river murmurs its endless conversation with the banks, patient and knowing. Tonight, you'll walk through 3 centuries of darkness along these same shores, feeling how the night changed, era by era, while the water kept flowing south toward the Gulf. Before we settle in, if you enjoy these relaxing journeys into the past, like the video and subscribe for more quiet history evenings. If there's a part of today you want to let go, or a memory tonight brings back, share it below. Now let's get comfortable and ease into tonight's journey. You arrive at the settlement just as the last light drains from the sky, and what you find barely deserves the name City. 20 years old, carved from swampland that fights every day to reclaim what was taken. The buildings are rough, cypress logs chinked with mud and moss, roofs of palmetto thatch that leak when the rains come hard. Your feet sink slightly into the ground that never fully dries. The settlement clings to this bend in the river because the river is everything, the only road in or out, the only connection to the world beyond this wilderness. Evening routines begin before complete darkness falls. You watch a woman secure chickens in a coop built on stilts, lifting them above the ground where snakes and rising water can't reach. A man checks the levee one more time, walking its length with a lantern, looking for soft spots where the river might break through while everyone sleeps. Children carry armloads of wood inside before the mosquitoes grow too thick to bear. Every task is done with the knowledge that darkness here means danger in ways the old country never taught. Inside the crude buildings, tallow candles flicker to life. The light they give is weak and greasy, barely pushing back the shadows that gather in corners. The smell of burning fat mixes with wood smoke and the ever-present scent of the river, mud and rot and something alive that you can't quite name. You hear French soldiers changing watch at the small garrison, their boots squelching in the perpetual mud. African voices drift from nearby quarters, speaking languages the French don't understand and don't care to learn. Native traders who came to barter during daylight have departed, their canoes already distant on the darkening water. The night here holds fears that settlement can't erase. The wilderness presses close on all sides, forest and swamp that could swallow this fragile outpost without effort. Flooding comes without warning when the river decides to rise. Disease moves through the cramped quarters like smoke, taking the old and young first, leaving the rest to wonder who will sicken next. Animals you can't see make sounds you don't recognize. The darkness beyond the candlelight feels absolute, hostile, waiting. You find a place to rest on a rough-hewn bed frame, strung with rope, a thin mattress stuffed with Spanish moss laid across it. Mosquito netting hangs around you, but the insects still find ways through, their high whine constant in your ears. The building creaks and settles. Through gaps in the walls, you feel the night air moving, heavy with moisture. Someone coughs in the next room. A baby cries briefly, then quiets. The river's sound never stops, that low, steady murmur that becomes the heartbeat of this place. Sleep comes hard on this first night in New Orleans. The bed is uncomfortable, the air too thick, the sounds too unfamiliar, but exhaustion eventually wins. You close your eyes with the river's voice in your ears, knowing that tomorrow will bring the same struggles, the same fight against water and disease and isolation, the same desperate hope that this settlement will survive long enough to become something more than a dream, dying slowly in the swamp. The Mississippi moves past in darkness, indifferent to French ambitions and human suffering. The water has been here far longer than any settlement, and it will outlast everything built along its banks. Tonight it carries the sounds of this struggling outpost downstream, the prayers spoken in crude chapels, the curses of soldiers on watch, the songs sung quietly in quarters where people remember other homes across an ocean. The river holds all of it without choosing sides, its current steady and relentless. You walk the same riverbank decades later, and the transformation stops you mid-step. The crude cypress buildings have given way to structures that speak a different language, Spanish colonial architecture, with thick stuccoed walls that glow pale in the evening light. Wrought iron balconies cast intricate shadows across the streets. The settlement that barely survived has become a city that intends to stay. Evening falls differently now. You hear the cabildo bells marking the hour, their bronze voices carrying across the rooftops, giving structure to time in ways the early settlement never knew. Gas lamps appear along particular streets, their flames protected by glass, pushing back the darkness with steady yellow light. The wilderness still presses close beyond the city's edges, but here, within the growing grid of streets, the night feels less like an enemy and more like a canvas for human activity. You notice the night watchmen beginning their rounds, men hired to patrol the streets with lanterns and clubs, calling out the hours, and that all is well. Their voices echo off the Spanish buildings. 10 o'clock and all's calm. The presence of these watchmen changes how the night feels. Someone is watching now, maintaining order. Though whose order and for whose benefit remain questions with complicated answers. The sounds of evening have multiplied and layered. Spanish guitar drifts from a courtyard, its notes quick and precise, nothing like the French songs that once dominated here. You hear Creole French and Spanish mingling in conversations, two languages braiding together into something new. From certain quarters come Caribbean rhythms, patterns brought by people whose journeys to this city were nothing like the Spanish administrators' comfortable passages. The night is becoming a conversation between cultures, whether those cultures want to speak to each other or not. The river trade continues after dark now in ways it couldn't before. You watch boats being unloaded by lantern light, their cargo moving through official channels and unofficial ones simultaneously. Smuggling has become an art form under Spanish rule, a dance between what the law permits and what the economy demands. The darkness serves both the customs inspectors and those who avoid them, the same shadows hiding different purposes. You find yourself near a night market that's formed in a square near the river. Vendors sell food cooked over small fires, gumbo that smells of okra and spice, rice dishes fragrant with saffron, bread still warm from ovens. People gather here after the day's work ends, not just to buy food, but to see each other, to share news, to exist in public space during hours that once meant only retreat and fear. The night is becoming social, communal, a time for connection rather than just survival. Inside the Spanish-style homes, evening routines have grown more structured. You glimpse families through windows, gathering for prayers before the household shrine, the rhythm of Catholic devotion marking the transition from day to night. Candles burn before painted saints. Children kneel beside their parents, learning the words that will shape their understanding of the world. The church bells that rang at dusk will ring again at various hours through the night, reminding everyone that time is measured, watched, and accounted for by powers both earthly and divine. The night still holds dangers, fever, flooding, violence, but the city has learned to inhabit its darkness with more confidence. The streets aren't safe exactly, but they're navigable. The wilderness hasn't retreated, but the boundary between settlement and swamp has become more defined. The city is discovering what it will become in these hours after sunset, something distinct from both its French origins and its Spanish governance, becoming New Orleans. In this place, cultures collide and create something that belongs entirely to neither, but draws from both. You stand at the levee as the first American flatboats arrive with the evening tide, and everything you've come to understand about this city's rhythm fractures. The boats are rough built, nothing like the elegant vessels that came before, just logs lashed together, piled high with goods and men who speak English in accents that sound harsh against the softer Creole French and Spanish you've grown accustomed to. These rivermen tie up as darkness falls, and they don't go quietly into the night. They're loud, restless, looking for entertainment after weeks at sea. The city divides against itself now, in ways that reshape the night completely. The old Creole quarter maintains its evening routines, the guitar music, the Spanish bells, the careful social order that took decades to establish. But the American sector across Canal Street pulses with different energy entirely. You hear it in the competing sounds as dusk deepens. French opera drifts from one direction, while American fiddles scrape out frontier melodies from another. The night no longer speaks one language or follows one set of rules. You walk between these two worlds as darkness settles, and the contrast becomes physical. Gas lamps burn steadily in the Creole streets, maintained and predictable. In the American sector, light comes from whatever source is cheapest: torches, oil lamps, candles stuck in bottles. The streets there stay busy far later than the old city ever permitted. Taverns throw open their doors, spilling noise and light onto the muddy thoroughfares. Gambling houses operate openly, cards slapping on tables, dice rattling in cups, money changing hands in amounts that would have shocked the careful Spanish administrators. The river work continues through darkness now, in ways that would have been unthinkable in earlier decades. You watch stevedores loading and unloading cargo by lantern light, their labour organised by men who shout in English and don't care about the old customs of when work should stop. The American appetite for commerce knows no clock. If goods need moving, they move, whether the sun has set or not. The Mississippi becomes a highway that never closes, boats arriving and departing at all hours, their lanterns creating a moving constellation on the black water. Sleep becomes harder to find in this New Orleans. The city never fully quiets anymore. There's always noise from somewhere, a fight breaking out in an American tavern, music from a Creole courtyard, the shouts of rivermen looking for the next drink, the splash of cargo hitting water, the creak of ropes and wood as boats shift against their moorings. You lie in darkness listening to a city that's arguing with itself, two visions of what this place should be competing in the streets below. The evening economy exploded in these years. You see businesses that exist only after dark, pleasure districts taking shape, where the American hunger for entertainment meets the port city's willingness to provide it. Women appear in doorways lit by red lanterns. Card sharps work the crowds of newly arrived rivermen. Pickpockets move through the dim streets with practiced ease. The night becomes a marketplace, for everything daylight pretends doesn't exist. You feel the tension in how people move through these hours. Creoles walk their traditional routes with disapproval, evident in their posture, trying to maintain dignity and order in a city that's becoming something they don't recognize. Americans stride through the streets with the confidence of people who believe they've purchased not just territory, but the right to reshape everything according to their vision. The two groups occupy the same darkness, but experience completely different nights. The Mississippi cuts between the two worlds, bearing American ambitions and Creole resistance downstream. The water refuses to take sides. It simply accepts what the city pours into it. The sewage and the dreams, the violence and the music, the old ways and the new chaos, and continues its journey south toward the Gulf. You walk past grand homes in the Garden District as evening settles, and the gas lighting reveals a city that has learned to perform its wealth with precision. The flames behind glass mantles burn steadily and bright, illuminating parlours where crystal chandeliers catch and multiply the light into 1,000 small fires. Through tall windows, you see women in silk gowns, men in tailored coats, servants moving with silver trays balanced perfectly. Piano music drifts into the street, Chopin, played with the kind of leisure that comes from having nothing more urgent to do than practice scales. The air smells different here than down at the docks, magnolia blossoms and jasmine instead of river mud, perfume instead of sweat. The evening breeze carries the scent of elaborate dinners being prepared in kitchens you can't see, roasted meats, French sauces, imported wines being decanted. This is the night the cotton economy built, elegant and deliberate, every detail arranged to demonstrate that the people inside these homes have mastered not just wealth, but refinement. But you know what stands behind this elegance now. The same river that brought you here brought 135,000 human beings to be sold in the city's markets. The docks you passed earlier, the warehouses lining the streets near the water, the auction houses on Esplanade Avenue. They're the machinery that makes these gaslit parlours possible. The cotton bales stacked higher than a man can reach, the sugar barrels being rolled onto steamboats. All of it moves on the backs of people who will never stand in these elegant rooms except to serve. You turn toward the river as darkness deepens and the divide becomes absolute. The steamboats sit heavy in the water, their decks piled with wealth that's being counted in the harbour master's office. The boats themselves are lit like floating palaces, gas lamps running along their rails, their smokestacks painted in bright colours that show even in darkness. Whistles echo across the water as captains signal their departures. The Mississippi has reached its commercial peak, and the night reveals it. Constant traffic, constant noise, constant movement of goods that enrich some while exhausting others. The working night exists in parallel to the elegant one, invisible unless you know where to look. Down at the docks, men load cargo under lantern light, their shifts measured by how many bales they can move. before their bodies give out. In the kitchens behind the grand homes, cooks work over hot stoves preparing meals they won't eat. In the quarters that the gas lamps don't reach, people finish the day's forced labour and try to find rest before tomorrow demands everything again. But Sunday nights are different. You've heard whispers about Congo Square, about the few hours each week when the city's careful control loosens just enough. The square sits at the edge of the French Quarter, a space where people gather openly to play drums, to dance, to insist on their humanity through rhythm and motion. The wealthy city allows these gatherings partly because denying them might be more dangerous, might create pressure with nowhere to release. But letting them doesn't mean accepting them. The permission comes with watchers, with curfews, with the midnight boundary that sends everyone back to their designated places. You stand between these two worlds as the evening deepens, the gas-lit parlours where wealth performs itself, and the darker spaces where survival requires different kinds of strength. The Mississippi runs past both, carrying the city's contradictions in its current. The same water catches the chandelier light from elegant homes and the torch flames from Congo Square. The river holds both stories in its memory, moving south as it has for millennia, witnessing everything that happens along its banks. You stand at the levee under Union occupation, and the night has changed into something watchful and tense. Federal gunboats sit dark on the water, their cannons visible as black shapes against the slightly lighter sky. The elegant steamboats that once moved freely up and down the river now require permission to depart, their cargo inspected, their passengers questioned. The Mississippi flows under military control, and the darkness that once meant commerce or gathering now means checkpoints and searchlights cutting through the humid air. Evening in occupied New Orleans begins with the sound of boots on cobblestones. Union patrols walk regular routes through the streets, their presence meant to remind everyone that the city now belongs to someone else. You hear the measured cadence of their steps, the occasional challenge when they stop someone after curfew, and the responses given carefully because the wrong words or wrong tone could mean arrest. The gas lamps still burn in the wealthy homes, but the light feels different, more exposed, less safe, as if the darkness outside the windows holds threats that wealth can't protect against anymore. The city has learned to whisper. Conversations that once took place openly in courtyards now take place behind closed doors, with voices kept low. Curtains stay drawn, even when lamps are lit inside. People move through the streets with their eyes down, acknowledging the soldiers with brief nods but offering nothing more. The night that once divided cleanly between elegant parlours and working quarters now holds a third presence, the occupying force that watches both, trusts neither, and maintains order through the constant reminder that resistance will be met with consequences. You notice how families try to maintain their routines despite everything. Dinner still happens at the usual hour, though the meals are simpler now, with ingredients harder to find as the blockade cuts off supplies. Children are still put to bed with the same rituals, stories told in quiet voices, prayers spoken, kisses on foreheads. Parents try to create normalcy in rooms where the sounds of military occupation drift through the walls. The effort itself becomes a kind of resistance, insisting that family life continues even when the world outside has fractured. But there's another night happening in spaces the patrols don't fully reach, In certain quarters, in certain buildings, people gather to share information, to plan, to maintain connections that the occupation tries to sever. You hear whispers about messages being passed, about resistance that doesn't look like battles but like small refusals, work done slowly, supplies that mysteriously spoil, intelligence that somehow reaches Confederate forces still fighting beyond the city. The darkness becomes a cover for acts that daylight would make impossible. Rest refuses to come easily in this occupied city. You lie in bed listening to sounds that never quite resolve into safety. Distant gunfire from somewhere upriver, shouted orders in English accents that still sound foreign here. The splash of oars as patrol boats move on the water. Your eyes close and open, anxiety living just beneath consciousness. The constant awareness that everything has changed, and no one knows when or if it'll change back. The Mississippi continues its journey, indifferent to which flag flies over the city. The water has seen armies come and go before, has witnessed cities rise and fall along its banks. Tonight, it carries the weight of occupation downstream. The fear, the anger, the determination to survive, the hope that this darkness will eventually lift. The river remembers everything and judges nothing, patient as always, flowing south toward the Gulf. You walk streets where formerly enslaved people now move freely after dark, and the night holds possibilities that were illegal just months ago. The war has ended. The occupation continues, but its purpose has shifted. Federal troops still patrol, but now they're meant to protect rather than just control. You see black men walking with purpose toward evening meetings, carrying themselves differently than before, shoulders back, eyes forward, moving through darkness that once meant constant danger with something that looks almost like confidence. The contested night reveals itself in how different groups experience these same hours. You pass a church where light spills from the windows and voices rise in song, hymns sung by people who can now gather openly to worship, to organise, to plan their futures. Inside, you glimpse people sitting in pews they built themselves, listening to preachers who speak about freedom as something real rather than distant. These evening services are about more than religion. They're about community forming in ways that slavery prevented, about people claiming space and time as their own. But the backlash lives in the same darkness. You feel it in how particular white residents move through the streets now, their anger visible in tight shoulders and hard stares, their resentment at a world turned upside down. The elegant homes that once glowed with gaslit certainty now feel besieged, their inhabitants gathering behind closed doors to complain about the new order and plot its reversal. The night that once divided cleanly between wealth and labour now fractures along lines of rage and hope, resistance and determination. You hear the sounds of change mixing with the sounds of threat. From one direction comes the music of a brass band. Black musicians playing instruments they bought with their own wages, creating sounds that will eventually transform into jazz, but right now are just the joy of making noise without asking permission. From another direction comes the rumble of horses, riders, moving in groups through darkness, their faces covered, their purpose clear to anyone who understands what night riding means in this new South. The schools hold evening classes now, lamplight visible through windows where adults learn to read by candlelight after working all day. You watch people bent over slates and books, their concentration absolute, understanding that literacy means power in ways that go beyond just reading words. Teachers, some from the north, some from the community itself, work patiently through lessons. At the same time, darkness presses against the windows, and everyone knows that this gathering, this learning, this claiming of knowledge makes them targets. The river reopens to commerce that was choked during the war, and the docks grow busy again with evening work. But the city's soul carries wounds that won't heal quickly. You see it in how people navigate the streets, some with new hope, others with barely contained fury, everyone aware that this moment is fragile, that the freedom granted by war and occupation could vanish as quickly as it came. The night offers little rest in Reconstruction New Orleans. Those who gained freedom lie awake wondering if it will last, making plans, dreaming of futures that are possible. Those who lost power lie awake, resenting every change, plotting restoration, refusing to accept that their world has ended. The Mississippi runs between both, carrying hope and hatred downstream together, witnessing a city trying to become something new, while part of it fights desperately to remain what it was. You stand in Storyville as electric lights flicker on for the first time, and the night transforms into something it has never been before. A destination, a product, something the city can sell. The district sits in a carefully bounded area near Basin Street, a legal red light zone created by city ordinance, and the lights that illuminate it are harsh and honest about what happens here. This isn't the elegant gaslit parlour or the defiant gathering in Congo Square. This is commerce made visible, pleasure turned into industry, the night packaged for anyone with money to spend. The evening sounds crystallise into something recognisable now. You hear ragtime pouring from the doorways of saloons and sporting houses, piano players whose hands move so fast they blur, creating rhythms that fall in unexpected places. These syncopations make your body want to move, even when your mind hasn't decided to. The music is joyful and melancholy at once, technically brilliant and emotionally raw. These players are inventing something in real time, taking the rhythms that survived in Congo Square and mixing them with European harmonies, creating patterns that have never existed before. The Mississippi sits behind you as a backdrop now, rather than a lifeline. The river still flows, still carries goods and people, but the city has grown beyond depending on it for everything. Railroads bring visitors from inland. The port handles cargo that moves by schedule rather than by the river's mood. The water that once defined everything about this place has become atmosphere, romantic in the electric light, its endless movement now just one element in a larger performance. You walk past buildings where music spills into the street from every floor. A cornet player stands on a balcony, his horn catching the light, playing phrases that answer the piano inside. His tone is clear and strong, notes bending in ways that European training never taught, yet somehow express more feeling than strict technique ever could. People stop on the street to listen. Some dance right there on the banquette, their movements loose and improvised, responding to music that invites participation rather than demanding formal steps. The night economy here runs on pleasure and escape. You see tourists from uptown, businessmen from out of town, rivermen still coming off the boats, all looking for entertainment that daylight society pretends doesn't exist. The women who work these streets and houses are part of the machinery, their labour as essential to Storyville's function as the musicians' performances. The city has decided that vice contained is better than vice scattered, so it draws boundaries, issues licenses, and collects taxes on activities it officially condemns. But the most important thing happening in these streets isn't the legal prostitution, or the gambling, or even the drinking. It's the music. You hear early jazz being born in rooms where black musicians play for white audiences, where Creole players mix with darker-skinned ones, despite the city's obsession with racial categories, where improvisation becomes the core principle rather than an occasional flourish. The musicians here are creating the sound that will define New Orleans, that will eventually spread across the world and reshape music everywhere it touches. Different neighborhoods still experience different nights. Uptown, the wealthy maintain their evening routines behind closed doors, pretending Storyville doesn't exist, while their sons and husbands visit it regularly. In working-class neighborhoods, families gather on stoops to escape the heat. Children playing in the streets until exhaustion finally drives them to bed. But Storyville is where the city's night becomes its identity, where New Orleans learns to sell its difference, its sound, its particular mixture of joy and sorrow and defiance that no other American city can replicate. The river runs past this transformation, carrying the sound of cornets and pianos in its current, witnessing a city that has learned to monetize its darkness and, in doing so, created something that will outlive all the vice and commerce, a music that refuses to be contained or controlled, that speaks truths the daylight city won't acknowledge. You walk past a club on Perdido Street where Louis Armstrong learned his instrument, and the sound that pours through the open door stops you completely. The cornet he plays cuts through the humid night air with a clarity and power that makes everything else fade. His tone is so pure, so perfectly controlled, yet somehow wild at the same time. Notes that soar and dip and bend in ways that seem impossible, that express joy and longing in the exact phrase. Around him, other musicians answer and challenge, building something together that exists only in this moment, this performance, this particular gathering of players who understand each other without needing words. The night has become a performance now in ways that go beyond Storyville's commerce. Music pours from doorways, up and down the street, different styles, different bands, but all connected by the same spirit of improvisation and innovation. You hear a piano player taking a melody everyone knows and transforming it into something entirely new, his left hand keeping a steady rhythm. In contrast, his right hand explores possibilities the composer never imagined. A clarinet weaves between the beat, finding spaces that shouldn't exist but somehow do. The music is conversation, argument, celebration, all happening at once. Prohibition has arrived, but in New Orleans it means almost nothing. The speakeasies operate openly, their doors marked by symbols everyone recognizes, their interiors packed with people drinking and dancing, as if no law had ever been passed. You watch police walk past establishments where illegal alcohol flows freely, their indifference so complete it becomes its own kind of permission. The city has decided that some laws don't apply here, that trying to stop people from drinking in New Orleans makes as much sense as trying to stop the river from flowing. The crowds inside these clubs are mixed in ways that would shock other cities. White and black and Creole, wealthy and working class, tourists and locals, all pressed together in rooms where the music matters more than the social rules that govern daylight. A businessman from uptown stands next to a dock worker, both tapping their feet to the same rhythm. Women dance with whoever asks, the formal rules of courtship, abandoned in the heat and noise and joy of the music. For these few hours, the night creates a democracy that day would never permit. You notice families eating late suppers to the sound of distant horns, children falling asleep to rhythms that pulse through the walls of their homes. The music has become the city's heartbeat, as constant as the river's flow, as essential as the humid air. Even people who never enter the clubs, who maintain their distance from the vice districts, can't escape the sound. It seeps into everything, reshaping what it means to live here. But you also see the beginning of loss. Musicians are leaving, taking the sound north to Chicago, to New York, to cities that will pay them better and treat them with slightly more respect. The Great Migration is pulling people away from the South, away from Jim Crow violence and limited opportunities, and the music travels with them. The clubs here still overflow with talent, but the best players are starting to understand that their gift might find better soil elsewhere. The Mississippi runs past these jazz-filled nights, carrying the sound downstream and somehow upstream too, spreading it beyond this city's boundaries. The river witnessed the music's birth, and now it watches the music begin its journey into the wider world, becoming something bigger than New Orleans, even as it remains forever rooted in these streets. These nights, this particular mixture of cultures that could only have created jazz. You stand at the levee during more challenging times, and the night has contracted into something smaller, quieter, more careful. The electric lights that seemed so bright and promising just years ago now burn less frequently. People conserve electricity the way they conserve everything else, turning off lamps in empty rooms and going to bed earlier to save on lighting costs. The clubs that once overflowed with music and crowds now open only on weekends. Their doors dark on Tuesday and Wednesday nights when nobody has money to spend on entertainment. The river traffic has thinned. Fewer boats tie up at the docks. The cargo they carry is lighter, less varied. You watch men who once worked steady shifts now standing idle in the evening, their hands empty, their faces showing the weight of days spent looking for work that doesn't exist. The depression has reached even New Orleans, a city that thought its music and its river would protect it from the troubles affecting other places. Evening routines have changed to match the times. You see families eating simpler meals, red beans and rice stretched to feed more people, yesterday's bread fried to make it seem fresh, coffee reheated until it's more memory than flavour. Women sit by lamplight, mending clothes that should have been replaced years ago, their needles moving with patient precision, making threadbare fabric last another season. Children play with toys that have been passed down and repaired so many times that the original form is barely recognisable. But the music hasn't died, it's changed, become something different, but it persists. You hear it coming from houses where families gather around radios, listening to broadcasts from cities up north where New Orleans musicians now play. The sound returns to its birthplace, transformed, polished, recorded, but still recognisable. Parents listen to voices they knew as children, now famous, now belonging to the broader world, but still carrying something essential from these streets. The night as refuge becomes more critical when day offers so little. People gather on stoops and in courtyards after dark, sharing what little they have, a bottle passed around, stories told to make each other laugh, songs sung without instruments, because voices cost nothing. The gatherings are smaller than in prosperous times, but somehow more essential. The community holds itself together through these evening hours, refusing to let hardship break the connections that matter. Then war comes, and the night fills with new anxieties. You see families clustered around radios, listening to news from Europe and the Pacific, trying to understand how far away the fighting is and whether it will reach here. Young men disappear into military service, their absence felt most sharply in the evening when families gather and chairs sit empty. Mothers lie awake listening for telegrams that might arrive at any hour, carrying news no one wants to receive. The river now carries military vessels, their grey hulls moving south toward the Gulf and the war beyond. You watch them pass in darkness, their running lights dimmed, their decks crowded with men too young to be going where they're going. The Mississippi becomes a highway to war, and the city that grew up along its banks sends its sons downstream, hoping the water that always returns will bring them back too. Rest arrives in fragments during these years, interrupted by worry about money, about sons overseas, about a world that seems to be falling apart. But tomorrow always comes anyway, demanding that people rise and face another day of scarcity, fear, or both. The night offers exhaustion, but not peace, not yet. You walk past neon signs that buzz and flicker in colours the gas lamps never knew. Electric pink, chemical blue, green that looks almost radioactive in the humid darkness. The war has ended, prosperity has returned, and the night announces itself differently now. Signs advertise restaurants, music clubs, and hotels, all competing for attention, with light that pulses and blinks, refusing to be ignored. The elegance of earlier eras has given way to something louder, more commercial, more American in a way that makes the old Creole families shake their heads in disapproval. The sounds of the evening have changed with the technology. Through open windows, you hear television sets, their blue glow visible from the street, as families gather around them to watch shows broadcast from New York and California. The voices coming from those boxes speak with accents that aren't from here, telling stories about lives that have nothing to do with this river or this city. Children sit mesmerized by the moving pictures, while their parents remember when evening entertainment meant making your own music, telling your own stories, creating rather than consuming. You notice the cars now, everywhere, their presence reshaping how the night works. Young people cruise the streets in automobiles their parents saved years to buy, radios playing rock and roll that mixes the rhythm and blues born in these neighbourhoods with something whiter, safer, more acceptable to mainstream audiences. The music that began in Congo Square and grew in Storyville has been absorbed and transformed, sold back to the world in forms that sometimes barely acknowledge its origins. The French Quarter has become something it never was before, a tourist destination, a place people visit rather than simply live. You watch out-of-towners walking the streets with cameras, stopping to photograph the ironwork balconies, the narrow streets, the atmosphere that the city has learned to package and sell. The night here is performance now, every bar and restaurant playing up the authentic New Orleans experience. For visitors who will leave in a few days, and remember it as quaint, exotic, slightly dangerous, in ways that felt safe because they were temporary. But the river is less central than it's ever been. Bridges span it now. Highways run beside it. The city can turn its back on the water and look inland in ways earlier generations never could. The Mississippi still flows, still carries cargo, but it's no longer the only road in or out. You can leave New Orleans by car now, by plane, without ever acknowledging the river that made this city possible. The water that once defined everything has become a backdrop, scenic but not essential. The night of the civil rights struggle is beginning to reshape who can go where after dark. You see the tension in how people navigate the streets. Black families knowing which restaurants will serve them and which won't, which music venues welcome everyone, and which maintain the colour line despite the law slowly changing. Lunch counters that refused service during the day become battlegrounds in the evening. Young people sitting in protest, insisting on their right to occupy the same spaces as everyone else. The city strains between tradition and progress, preservation and change. Some neighbourhoods fight to keep things as they were. The architecture, the social order, the careful hierarchies that governed who belonged where. Others embrace the new, air conditioning that makes the heat bearable, suburbs that spread beyond the old boundaries, opportunities that didn't exist before. The night holds both impulses, both futures, and nobody knows yet which will win. You stand in darkness during Betsy in 1965, and the night has become something primal and terrifying. The power failed hours ago. No street lights, no house lights, no comforting glow from anywhere. Just absolute blackness, broken occasionally by lightning that reveals water rising in the streets, wind tearing at buildings, the city being unmade by forces it can't control. You hear the wind screaming, not howling or whistling, but screaming, a sound that makes your chest tight with fear you can't reason away. The hurricane has redefined what night means. This isn't the darkness of rest, gathering, or even occupation. This is darkness that holds death. You crouch in a room on the second floor because the first floor is flooding, listening to water lap at the stairs below, wondering if it'll keep rising. Outside, things crash and tear, roofs being peeled away, trees snapping, debris becoming projectiles that slam into walls with sounds like gunshots. Every noise could be the one that means your shelter is failing. The river and the lake are both enemies now. The levees that were supposed to protect have broken in places, and water pours through the breaches with unstoppable force. The pumps that generally keep the city dry are overwhelmed or have failed. The Mississippi, once seemed eternal and patient, now feels malevolent, joining with Lake Pontchartrain to reclaim land that was never really meant for human habitation. You understand in this darkness what the earliest settlers knew. This city exists on borrowed time, built in a place that water wants back. The preparation rituals before storms become as familiar as any religious observance over the decades that follow. You watch families boarding windows as evening approaches, their movements practiced and grim. They know the routine now. Move everything valuable to upper floors, fill bathtubs with water, charge every device, pack bags in case evacuation becomes necessary. Children help tape windows in X patterns that might keep glass from shattering inward. The preparations happen in daylight, but everyone knows they're preparing for night, for the hours when the storm will hit hardest, with visibility zero and help impossible. Camille in 1969 misses the city, but reminds everyone how close disaster always sits. In 1998, George's neighbourhoods were thought they be safe. Each storm teaches lessons written in water and wind. Which levees are weak, which neighbourhoods flood first, how quickly everything can be lost. The night before, each hurricane carries a strange quality, too quiet, too still, the air pressure dropping until your ears pop and your head aches. Birds disappear. The sky turns colours that don't look natural. Then darkness falls and the waiting begins. You learn to sleep differently during storm season, which stretches from June through November. Half the year spent with one ear, constantly listening. Even on calm nights, you wake at the sound of rain, wondering if this is the one, if you should start moving things upstairs, if you should leave while you still can. The anxiety becomes part of how you rest. A low hum of awareness that never entirely disappears between June and November. The night of August 29th, 2005 changed everything forever. Katrina's darkness brings a terror that makes Betsy seem like preparation. You watch if you're still here, if you didn't evacuate, as the city drowns. The levees fail not in one place but in many. Water pours in from the lake, from the canals, from breaches that turn neighbourhoods into lakes in minutes. The darkness hides the scale of destruction, but you hear it, the roar of water, the screams of people trapped, the helicopter blades that can't reach everyone who needs rescue. The river keeps flowing through it all, unchanged by the chaos around it. The Mississippi has seen hurricanes before and will see them again, but the city it flows past will never be quite the same. You walk through the dark, empty city in September 2005, and the silence is worse than any storm sound. No lights anywhere, no hum of air conditioners, traffic or music. Just absolute quiet, broken occasionally by the splash of water still draining, the creak of damaged buildings settling, the distant thump of helicopter blades. The night smells of mould and sewage and something chemical you can't identify. Your feet slosh through water that shouldn't be here. That's been here too long. That's left a brown line on every wall showing how high it rose. The city has drowned, and the darkness hides the full scope of what's been lost. You pass houses with spray-painted X's on their doors, the markings rescue teams left indicating they searched here, how many bodies they found when they came through. Some neighbourhoods are completely abandoned, every resident evacuated or dead, the streets empty of everything except debris and the occasional boat moving through water that used to be a road. The French Quarter sits on higher ground and escaped the worst flooding, but even here the power is gone, the tourists vanished, the music silenced. The slow return of light happens in stages over months and years. First come the generators, their diesel engines coughing to life, providing power to a few blocks, a few buildings, creating islands of electricity in the darkness. You hear them running all night, their constant rumble becoming the new soundtrack of the city. Then temporary power lines were strung by utility crews working 18-hour days, restoring neighbourhoods, one grid section at a time. You watch the map of darkness shrink slowly, power returning to areas that have been black for weeks, for months. The night feels different now, even when the lights come back. Fewer people means less sound, less activity, less of the constant hum that made New Orleans recognisable. You walk streets that used to overflow with music and find them quiet at 9 p.m. Businesses closed, residents who returned going to bed early because there's nothing else to do. Tomorrow brings more work rebuilding what the water destroyed. The city that never slept has learned to rest, though not by choice. Fear settles into evening routines in ways that weren't there before. You notice people checking the weather obsessively as soon as the sun sets, looking at their phones every few minutes during storm season, ready to evacuate at the first sign of trouble. The trauma lives in bodies now, in how people startle at the sound of hard rain, in how they can't sleep when wind rattles the windows, in how they keep bags packed and essential documents in waterproof containers even in January. But music returns before almost anything else. You hear it first from musicians who came back early, playing on street corners for nobody, playing because they need to prove the city's soul survived. Then small clubs reopen, their stages hosting performances for audiences of 20 people who came back because they refused to let New Orleans die. The sound is different, sadder, more determined, carrying the weight of everything that was lost, but insisting that something essential remains. Families rebuild their evening rituals slowly, deliberately. Dinners resume around tables that survived the flood or were bought second-hand to replace those that didn't. Children return to beds in houses that smell of fresh paint covering water stains. The routines matter more now because they were taken away. After all, everyone learned how quickly normal can disappear. You feel the determination in how people insist on resuming traditions, on gathering for second lines, on cooking the same dishes their grandmothers made, on refusing to let disaster erase what makes this place itself. The river watched it all and kept flowing, patient as always, still moving south toward the Gulf. The water didn't cause this disaster. The failed levees did. The inadequate infrastructure. The decades of ignoring warnings. The Mississippi just flowed past, bearing witness to another chapter in the city's long relationship with water that gives life and takes it away. You stand at the levee today, and the river looks the same as it did 300 years ago, brown water moving south, carrying pieces of the continent toward the Gulf. But the city around it has transformed in ways those first French settlers could never have imagined. Cruise ships tower above the docks where flatboats once tied up, their decks stacked 10 stories high, lit with thousands of lights that turn them into floating cities. Container ships move cargo in metal boxes, efficiency replacing the human labour that once defined the riverfront. The Mississippi still flows, still carries commerce, but the scale has changed beyond recognition. The night announces itself differently now. Your phone glows in your hand, its screen brighter than the gas lamps that once seemed so modern. You scroll through social media while standing on the same ground where people once gathered by torchlight, where drummers played patterns that became jazz, where the night meant something you had to experience rather than document. Around you, others do the same. Faces lit by blue light, fingers swiping, everyone connected to the world, but somehow separate from the moment they're standing in. The sounds have multiplied and flattened at once. You hear amplified music from Bourbon Street, the volume turned up to compete with every other bar, every other band, the whole street becoming one loud wash of sound rather than distinct voices. Air conditioners hum from every building, their constant drone drowning out the subtler sounds, the river's movement, the night birds, the rhythm of people walking. The city that once fell quiet after midnight now runs 24 hours. The French Quarter especially never sleeps, always performing for tourists who expect New Orleans to be a certain way. But threads of continuity persist if you know where to look. You walk away from the tourist corridors and find neighbourhoods where families still gather on stoops as the heat breaks, where children still play in streets until parents call them in, where the evening means slowing down rather than speeding up. Second lines still parade on Sunday afternoons that stretch into the evening, brass bands playing the same streets their grandparents played, the tradition maintained through determination and love. The music hasn't died, it's adapted, survived, and continued to evolve the way it always has. The river remains constant through everything. It flowed past the French settlement in 1720, past the Spanish administrators, past the American chaos, past the elegant antebellum evenings and the darkness of the Civil War. It flowed past Reconstruction hope and Storyville vice, past the Jazz Age and the Depression, past Betsy and Katrina and every storm between. The water has witnessed 3 centuries of human drama playing out along its banks. The divisions and the gatherings, the music and the silence, the building and the destroying and the rebuilding. The night has always been a contested space in New Orleans. Different groups are claiming different hours for other purposes. The wealthy performing their refinement in gaslit parlours. The enslaved created culture in the few hours they could call their own. Musicians invented new sounds in clubs that existed only after dark. Families maintain traditions through evening rituals that connect them to ancestors and to each other. The darkness has held all of it, the best and worst of what humans do when night offers cover or possibility or simply rest. The Mississippi will keep moving long after these current buildings crumble, after the people walking these streets tonight are forgotten, after the music evolves into forms we can't predict. The river's memory is measured in geological time, in the slow movement of continents, in the endless cycle of water travelling from source to sea and back again. It has witnessed 300 years of New Orleans nights, and it will witness 300 more, carrying everything downstream without judgment. You stand where you began, the river dark and endless before you. 3 centuries of voices, music, struggle, and joy flow past in the current. The night changes, but the water remembers everything. Rest now, knowing the river keeps watch.